Thank you for listening to Life Improvement Radio. You are listening to a rebroadcast of a previously recorded show.
Well, I know that our next guest is on the line, and I'm a huge sports fan, and I'm also a historian. So I want to welcome the program author Samuel G. Freedman, author of Breaking the Line, the season in black college football that transformed the sport and changed the course of civil rights. Samuel, thanks for calling.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on, Neil.
Well, absolutely, and I just ultimately, anytime we kind of put two different things together, you put football and then also history, there's going to be a lot of interest, isn't there? Especially from a variety of people.
Well, I certainly hope so. I mean, certainly fascinated me, and it's a really rich story. You know, we've had a lot of stories told by nonfiction writers as well as great novelists about the civil rights movement, and some of them with civil rights in sports, like Jackie Robinson's, are quite well known. But what I felt I had here was, you know, an undeservedly lesser-known part of the civil rights narrative that involved the great football programs at the black colleges of this country.
Well, absolutely, and we hear about it all the time, Eric, about specifically how with baseball, but not as much with college football, especially black colleges.
Exactly, and a lot of these stories just touch so many. I mean, there's so many sports fans out there, but then to take the historical component to it and the civil rights, you know, actions. There's been a lot of books and movies that have come out in the last couple of years, kind of highlighting that. So I think it's a good time to bring it to light.
Well, I think, you know, the other thing I want to add is that this is, you know, kind of a unique example compared to some of the other stories that have come out. Things like The Blind Side, or I can't remember the name of it, but the film about Ernie Davis and Ben Schwartzwalder at Syracuse, in which it really ends up being sort of, you know, a white person or white family who's sort of the hero of this black story. And in Breaking the Line, what I've written about are really two heroic black coaches working in entirely black institutions, in this case Grambling College in Florida A&M, who were able to do things, you know, for their own community and for, you know, contributing really for the, you know, advancement and, in fact, the liberation of black people, and doing it through sports. You know, in the case of Eddie Robinson at Grambling, it was developing the first black quarterback for the NFL, James Harris, who was the quarterback on the Grambling team I write about in the book. And then Jake Gaither at Florida A&M, during that same season, 1967, when he's preparing to play Grambling in the Black College Championship game, he's also going behind the scenes as someone who had spent literally decades building up political relationships with the governors and legislators and higher ed regents in the state of Florida. He's going behind the scenes to get the permission which he needed to play the first ever interracial college football game in the South, and that's a game that happens in 1969 between the University of Tampa and Florida A&M, and, you know, another huge breakthrough, not just for football, but in terms of desegregating public facilities, giving the sign that you could have integrated large-scale events without, you know, riots breaking out, which, believe it or not, had been the fear.
Wow.
Well, it's so interesting in so many ways, because you hear about the situations going on, and again, how the civil rights movement started in certain aspects, and to think about, again, black college football teams, and specifically how they are able to organize, and some of the breakthroughs. Thinking about when you talk about Grambling, that's just one of the black colleges that has a fantastic football team and has great players like Doug Williams and different graduates that went on to play in the NFL. What a start to the thought process of kind of saying they can compete with the white players in college football, right? That's the beginning of this process, isn't it?
Exactly. Well, you know, it's hard, I think, for football fans now, unless they're as old as I am or older, to think back to the way football used to be in this country. But, you know, the major colleges in the South, I'm talking about all these SEC schools like Alabama and Georgia, or the ACC powers, or what used to be the Southwest Conference, which now is part of the Big 12, Texas, Arkansas, they all had entirely white teams for years after the universities themselves had begun to desegregate. So football was sort of kept as this area in which, you know, in which segregation persisted, in which the triumph of these all-white football teams was taken as a sign of white supremacy in the society. So desegregating football was hugely important. And during the years before that desegregation happened, you're right, these schools like Grambling, Florida A&M, Tennessee State, Southern University had extraordinary programs, even though they were hardly covered in the mainstream media at all. But, Grambling many years in the 50s and 60s was sending more players to the pros than USC was doing, than Notre Dame was doing, than Michigan State was doing, than Alabama was doing. And they're doing it with, far inferior facilities. For instance, I was watching game film as part of working on my book for Grambling versus Florida A&M in the Black College Championship game, which was played, by the way, for many years in Miami. It was called the Orange Blossom Classic. And one of Grambling's cornerbacks intercepts a pass, and I recognized the player, but he's wearing the wrong number. So when I interviewed him, I asked him, how come you're wearing number 20 instead of 25? And he said, we didn't have extra jerseys. My jersey got torn early in the game. I had to take a jersey off one of the reserves and wear his the rest of the game. And, and every time these teams went on road trips during this era of segregation, they couldn't pull into any Howard Johnson's or, Holiday Inn or what have you to stay over or to use a bathroom or to eat. They had to make these lengthy trips, planning very carefully where you would stop, and sometimes it would be stopping at a black-owned funeral parlor where the mortician would sell them sandwiches as kind of a side business. Sometimes it would mean, stopping at a black-owned life insurance company in Memphis to use their bathrooms in their employee cafeteria. And then when you got to the opposing school, you couldn't stay in a motel. There were no places that would take you. You stayed somewhere on the campus. And James Harris, that quarterback I mentioned before, he used to say that there are different motels where Grambling stayed on the road. There was the bleacher motel when they stayed underneath the bleachers. There was the dorm motel when they stayed in the dorms. There was, the cafeteria motel when they slept on, on cots in the cafeteria. That was the way these teams traveled.
Wow. I mean, that's a very different world from today.
Very different. And, and coming out of it was, were the people, the coaches, the players who helped to change football, and, because football is so important, especially here in the South, change society at large. So, we look at the NFL today. This season, although the number changes every week because of injuries, there have been as many as 8 or 9 African-American quarterbacks starting on the 32 teams. And when you realize that until James Harris became a regular starter in the mid-'70s for the LA Rams, there had never been a black regularly playing quarterback in the NFL. So it's less than 40 years ago when there were 0 black quarterbacks, to say nothing of coaches and, team executives, of which we have now too.
That's hard to believe. It's been that short of a time ago.
It is. I mean, fortunately, once the change happened, at least in the pros, it happened very rapidly. I think, first of all, because people saw it could be achieved. And secondly, the thing about the pros is, well, I'll make 2 points. They're kind of different about why the pros have been very successful with racial integration. One, it's a business. You must win. You have to fill your stadium. You have to sell your skyboxes. You have to sell your seat licenses. You can't have your games cut off local TV because you didn't sell out. You'll do whatever you have to do to win. And even teams that may not have been wild about the idea of starting a black quarterback or hiring a black coach initially, if that's who wins, that's who they're going to use. And the other reason is that the NFL has had something called the Rooney Rule, which is basically a diversity program which says that anytime there's a coaching or a front office vacancy, you have to interview at least one, African-American candidate for it. And that's how you get, people like Mike Tomlin, who, has won the Super Bowl at the Pittsburgh Steelers, and Tony Dungy, who won with the Indianapolis Colts, and team executives who've won rings like Jerry Reese on my team, the New York Giants. These guys got their chance because of that, and then they showed they could do the work.
And that's so interesting because, I going back in history, and when Eric talked about specifically how they didn't think that if we're talking about this, the breaking in of black quarterbacks, African American quarterbacks, they didn't think they could win till Doug Williams, and then
it wasn't just not winning. I mean, this is why it's so important society-wide to have black quarterbacks, because the arguments against a black playing quarterback were some of the most powerful, bigoted views against black people in general. Number one, if you've ever seen a playbook for a major college team, much less a pro team, it's like a thick encyclopedia volume. And so to play quarterback, I think, is the most intellectually demanding position in any sport. But the attitude was blacks aren't as smart as whites, so how could a black play quarterback? And then the quarterback is the field general. He gives the orders to the team. And the attitude, during these years of segregation is blacks are meant to take orders, definitely not to give orders, and definitely not to any white teammates. And there was this feeling that blacks lacked something in their character, that the way you have to be calm under pressure, which is true of every pro quarterback. And so to be the first black quarterback, to be that James Harris person, you had to shatter all of those stereotypes. And you had to do it, first of all, in the face of hate mail. And he literally, when he was playing with the LA Rams, had death threats. He played at least one game I know of with armed guards on the Rams sideline because of a credible death threat. And on the other hand, a sort of a positive pressure of all these black Americans looking at him, this one guy, James Harrison, thinking, you've got to succeed, because if you don't, then we're all going to be set back. So you have sort of negative pressures and positive ones, but both very, much weighing on you while you're trying to just go out and play effective winning football.
And then it took how many years till Doug Williams, till they finally considered this. And then they thought, if you're too athletic, you can't be a quarterback.
Right.
You got to play another position.
Exactly. That was the attitude that when talented black quarterbacks before James Harris broke through would get to the pros, they'd say, he's so fast, he's so athletic, we'll make him a wide receiver, we'll make him a defensive back. Eddie Robinson, James Harris's coach at Grambling, would never let the pro scouts time him in the 40-yard dash, because he knew that if they found out he could run a 4.6, which is a pretty decent time, they'd make him into a tight end. And, it's interesting you talk about Doug Williams, and it's so true. He comes out of college, out of Grambling, the year James Harris is traded after 3 great starting years in a row with the LA Rams. He's very controversially traded to San Diego to be a backup. But that's the year Doug Williams comes out of college. He's drafted in the first round. And then, of course, football fans know he wins the Super Bowl ring with Washington and is the MVP there in 1988. And there's an amazing moment in that game that really attests to what he knew also was riding on his success. Early in that game, which was Washington against Denver, he gets sacked, and his knee gets twisted under him in a really grotesque way. And you can see him writhing on the ground, and the training staff comes out, and what he's telling them is, I'm not coming out, because he knows if he comes out, they'll probably not get back in the game, and this chance to make history will be lost. So he had this incredible game. I think he threw 4 or 5 touchdown passes. He was the MVP after having to refuse to come out despite a pretty serious knee injury.
What's amazing, Eric, is I remember that game, and I was a Bronco fan, so I don't want to relive.
Yeah, right. Sorry.
I'm a Bronco and Steeler fan, Samuel. But Eric, again, this is interesting to look at how they had the same misconceptions when we talk about baseball. With another good one is Roberto Clemente.
Right.
I thought Roberto, with the racism that Roberto dealt with, was amazing. I had Al Oliver on my show a month ago, and he talked about specifically when finally Pittsburgh started to love him. But people would say, he's Puerto Rican, and he's dumb, and all these different things they came up with. And Eric, this is just interesting to know, learning about football as well, and how I guess there are bigots out there then, and there's bigots out there now, and the civil rights and how they were able to break through.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting to hear these stories and to see it, because I think the mainstream media doesn't really cover these types of things. So for someone to tell an in-depth story about this, it's very important, and it's not something that's in our distant past. It's still been relatively recent.
No, it is. It's relatively current. James Harris, I've been talking about, he's still in pro football. He's an executive now for the Detroit Lions. And, and these attitudes don't totally go away. Obviously, we've dealt with the whole N-word issue in the Richie Incognito, Jonathan Martin situation. But, I was a few weeks ago watching NFL Network one morning as I was in the gym, and they were talking about Russell Wilson on the Seahawks, and they asked one of the commentators what makes him so great, and the guy started to say he's a great athlete, and I was like, oh, here we go again, which is a coded word, coded term, and I thought, he's, maybe compared to me, Russell Wilson is a great athlete, but, he's 5'9" or 5'10", maybe 180, 190. He's a pipsqueak for pro football. He could not play as brilliantly as he plays if it was athletic ability alone. He's got incredible leadership skills. He's, a tremendous strategist. He's an astute decision maker, in pressure situations, and that's what allows him to be a great quarterback. By pro standards, being 5'9", 5'10", and 180 is definitely not having the physical equipment, the natural athletic abilities to be, a star quarterback.
Yeah, I think it's a real code word too as well, because you're talking about the best of the best, these athletes in the NFL. Everybody in the NFL or the NBA or, they're all great athletes. That's why they're there.
Exactly. In fact, Russell Wilson, I followed him a lot because I went to the University of Wisconsin, and he played one wonderful year for UW. But, when he came out, he wasn't taken till I think the third round, because the beef against him is he didn't have the physical equipment the way, taller, heavier quarterbacks. The standard quarterback now, they're talking like Cam Newton, Nick Foles is like 6'5", 250. So the fact that Wilson has been a great player right out of the gate says something about what he's got above his shoulders.
Definitely.
And then also, Samuel, I think that ultimately we still see this in so many different ways with black athletes. And think of the Jimmy the Greek comments, all that stuff. And so you really have more to write about, I think, if you continue to stick with this topic.
Well, thank you. Yeah. Well, I certainly hope to. I mean, this year has given me, I don't know if this is fortunate or unfortunate, as a journalist, sometimes bad news gives you your opportunities to write. But between the Incognito situation, the players boycotted Grambling, and, some of these other things, it's been a continuing series of moments in which I can connect what I wrote about happening in 1967 to, pro football or college football as we're seeing it in 2013.
Exactly, and then you even hear the situations. You can go on so many different interviews, even the interview involving the Florida State quarterback. What's going on now, the scandal there. Who knows what will come of all these different things. But when you're in sports, it's easy to get interviews. I'll tell you, Samuel, I'll trust me on that. As when we talk about certain things, I love having my pro athletes on the show. And it'd be interesting for us to connect another time and maybe get a chance to interview some of these people that are part of the book on my radio show. So
I'd be glad. It'd be wonderful to do that. James Harris, and of course Ken Riley, who was the quarterback at Florida A&M, and then it's an interesting thing. James Harris stuck it out, made it as a quarterback in the NFL. Ken Riley, who actually played a very similar kind of style of play to Russell Wilson, he never got the chance. He was instantly made into a defensive back, although he did have an incredible 15-year career with the Cincinnati Bengals. But it's sort of these two different outcomes for black quarterbacks of that era.
Absolutely.
We're happy to be back with either or both of them.
No, I will reach out to you, Samuel. I'll try to friend you on Facebook. We'll try to stay in touch, and because I have all these major athletes on my show all the time, and I'm interested. Like I said, I interviewed Al Oliver a month ago. I interview all these NFL stars all the time. I had Steve Grogan on last week. So,
oh boy, it's taking me back to my football watching youth.
Oh, absolutely, and even Rocky Blyer I've interviewed. So what we got to do is do a connection, and we could have a call with you and I, and then we can help promote the book more and talk about specifically those cast of characters in the off season, because we know how busy they are during the
I'm all in favor of it. Well, also, if you're based in Pittsburgh, one of the real heroes of desegregation in sports. Well, first of all, the Rooney family had a major positive role, but Bill Nunn, who was for many years a sports columnist for the Pittsburgh Courier, the African-American paper in town, and then simultaneously was a scout for the Steelers and still is sort of a scout emeritus, if that title exists. He's one of those kind of really unsung heroes. There were a couple of black scouts like him and a guy named Lloyd Wells, who was a scout for the Kansas City Chiefs, who really went out and identified the great black college players who some of the more foresighted pro teams like the Chiefs, like the Raiders, like the Steelers, the Bears, the Packers, the Browns, those handful of teams were really alert to, the tremendous talent coming out of the black colleges at a time when a lot of the other pro teams really were reluctant to make great use of it.
So, Eric, I never asked you, are you a big sports fan? Are you a Buccaneers fan?
I don't watch any, Neil, I don't watch any sports at all. No.
Are you a Rays fan?
Well, I mean, I support them, but I don't go to the games or watch them. So, I mean, I really don't watch any sports at all. But I support the Rays, support the Bucs just because I'm here and I'm local.
Yeah, and who's your big free safety that they signed for $15 million? He's supposed to come on my show this week.
I couldn't even tell you the name of the quarterback, Neil.
Okay. Well, I can't tell you the name of the quarterback of the Bucs either. It's so hilarious. But Samuel, where can we purchase your book and learn more about it? I'm definitely going to reach out to you to try to see if we can have an upcoming interview with some of the athletes that were part of your book.
Right. Well, Breaking the Line is available on Amazon, on BarnesandNoble.com. It's in most bookstores, but the easiest thing, obviously, you can order it online. And if people want to contact me, I'm on Facebook. If you look for the Samuel Freedman, spelled Freedman, at Columbia University, that's me. And I tweet at Samuel G. Freedman. And I also have a website, SamuelFreedman.com. So as long as people remember it's Freedman, they'll find me, and I'll find them.
It was an honor to have you on the show. I enjoyed the conversation. It was so interesting to learn about it. Eric's more probably interested in the history, but I'm a huge sports nut. And since I've done the radio thing for 4 years, I've kind of taken a back seat with education and then did education, but now I'm doing all these sports athletes. So it was tremendous to learn from you. And thanks again for calling.
I'm so grateful for the opportunity. Have a great day, guys.
You too. Thank you.
All right, take care. All right, you're listening to Author's Corner on the Toll Education Network, powered by Life Improvement Radio, live from the Miami Book Fair, and we'll be back in just a moment.
Thank you for listening to Life Improvement Radio. The views expressed by show hosts or their guests are their own and shall not be construed in any way as advice from Life Improvement Radio. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our website. Personal perspectives expressed by the producers, writers, or editors will always be presented as such. Any rebroadcast or retransmission without the expressed written consent of Life Improvement Radio is strictly prohibited. Thanks for listening.